or our participating sponsors.
My name is Dale Pazinski. I'm 19 years old, and this is how I live united. I've always been kind of a computer geek, and I found a way to use those skills to help the homeless in my community. For people facing hard times, computer skills and a basic resume are so important. It may seem like a small thing, but it makes a huge difference in people's lives. So with United Way, I created a program where I work with the homeless. Together, we go through their whole job history, write a resume, and then save it on their very own USB drive. We provide workbooks and training certificates. I even budgeted for cupcakes so we can celebrate as a class when one of our people gets a job. That's huge. When somebody says, "Hey man, that job that you helped me apply for, I got it." That's what living united feels like to me. My name is Dale Pazinski. I help people achieve financial independence. So I don't just wear the shirt, I live it.
Give, advocate, volunteer, live united. Go to liveunited.org. Brought to you by United Way and the Ad Council.
Live from the Xfinity Studios at WVON.
We're your original social media.
You're listening to Inspirational Perspective with Linal Harris on 1690, The Talk of Chicago.
About it. Come on, let's talk about it. Change up the things you see. Open your mind to possibility. Find your power, passion, and purpose. You know it's time for you to walk in greatness. Let's murder mediocrity. Slay your goals, live out your dreams. Right now. Inspiration, perspective. Open your mind to a better life. It's time to live the dream. Let's slay your goals, let your greatness flow with inspirational perspective.
Good morning, Chicago. You're listening to Inspirational Perspective. I'm your host, Linal Harris, your very own life coach right here on WVON 1690 AM, The Talk of Chicago. Inspirational Perspective on your radio. It is all about murdering mediocrity and living the best life possible. So as I ask you every Sunday morning, are you living the best life possible? And this is the place to be to explore that possibility. Well, good Sunday morning, everyone. Excited to be back on the air this Sunday morning. And even more excited about today's topic, which is the fundamentals of living with purpose and spirituality. I have a phenomenal guest for us this morning. You heard from him maybe a few weeks ago. You'll have an opportunity to hear from him again, Mr. Carlos Jones. But before I go to Carlos, I wanted to cue this morning's topic up and just share a few personal perspectives I have with you on what you're going to hear. We live in a world that the physical dominates. And when I say the physical, what we see, what we feel, what we smell. And I could go on down the five senses, but our consciousness perceives the things that we feel and see as reality. And at the same time, we know that we live in a multi-dimensional world where there are realities that we cannot physically, in some ways, feel, quote unquote, or physically see, but they do exist. The energy of creation, the vibration of words, but more importantly, the call of purpose, the stillness of spirituality. this is a topic that I've covered, but not in the depth that we'll cover today. And I'm really excited about today's guest because this is a friend, a colleague, and someone that I trust, I respect, and who I've had many, many, many conversations like the one you're about to hear with. The conversation of spirituality in itself is a conversation where there's a lot of conflict. One, because spirituality in many ways has been blended with religion, and they are different. But the other, because spirituality has a wide array of meaning, and not just meaning, but access. So what does it mean to be spiritual? And why is this such a contentious topic, but at the same time, an important topic? Well, here's what I'll say. I believe today's broadcast is going to be amazing. Not just because of the guests, but because of the amount of resistance, once again, we face just getting on the air. And with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Mr. Carlos Jones to the conversation. And welcome back, sir. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks, Linal.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So, Carlos, man, I'm excited to have this conversation. Purpose and spirituality, as you know, is a part of the 4 pillars of life that, in many ways, I've created a framework around in terms of how I think about the areas I want to advance in my life. And for those who may not know all 4 pillars, we've talked about them and we've covered the fundamentals for each pillar and saved the absolute best for last, because to me, this is the most important pillar within the 4 pillars. First being health and well-being. Second, relationships and love. The third, work and money. And now here we are, purpose and spirituality. I'm incredibly excited to have you on today as our guest to discuss this topic. And I just want to say this, Carlos, before we get started. If you start listening, I'm going to challenge you to go all the way to the end. Because one of the things that we know as coaches is often, Carlos, a lot of resistance comes up right when we need that thing that we're going to hear. Or right when we're about to have an intellectual or spiritual breakthrough. And so I already know that based on the conversation and what's going to happen and what people are going to learn today, that they're going to come up against some resistance. And I'm going to challenge you to stick with us as we go through the conversation. So Carlos, I want to preface it with this. And you and I, we had conversations multiple times this week. And one of the things we talked about is this is not a conversation about what's right or what's wrong, but really an opportunity for all of us to take a fresh look at how we think about living our lives and the focus that we put on certain aspects of our lives. And I'll say this overtly, but the lack of focus that we put on our purpose, God's purpose for our life, and in many ways, our spiritual journey. And so I'm curious, you're a coach, I'm a coach, you're the founder and operator of North Star Leadership Coaching. I love the name, by the way, especially since we're talking about purpose. And so, you know, many people have heard me talk about coaching, but first and foremost, for you, what is coaching about? And what drew you to coaching as a way to deliver on your purpose in this life?
Yeah, so, you know, I thought I knew what my purpose in coaching was and that it was super clear, and that was to help people get their goals, which seems super straightforward. And a few years ago, I started praying about, because it occurred to me, I have my reasons why I coach, fundamentally to help people reach their goals, but does God have something different? And I started praying about it, and honestly, when I started praying, I was like, I'm either going to get nothing back, or I'm going to get a confirmation, because my purpose in coaching is so airtight. I can't imagine God having a different idea. And sure enough, God had a different idea. And so the different idea that I sensed I was getting back from God was, he said, the purpose of coaching, if you're going to do it the way I want, is to help people become still and to get to know me. And that absolutely shocked me, because I didn't expect it, and it's not obvious.
Mm-hmm.
And it also presented a challenge in that, what are people going to think about that when they call me for business coaching, leadership coaching, life coaching, all the various reasons people call? And if they ask me, like, tell me about your coaching, and the way I say it now is, I am absolutely interested in what it is that you want. I'm going to tend to that with as much integrity as I can muster and as much skill and wisdom as I can bring to the table. And simultaneously, it's inside the context that there is a God that absolutely loves you, that has given a purpose to you, and I'm going to treat you as such along the way. And if at some point you're interested in having that conversation, I'd love to have that conversation with you.
Man, I
and
love
so
that.
I'm up front with it.
Yeah.
And, you know, I coach some people who are atheists. I coach a lot of people that are agnostic or in the middle, or, you know, various non-defined spiritual, and we'll get into terminology later, and some people that are very definitely of some particular faith, and not a single one of them has been offended by that. There's an amazing openness to it.
I believe that, and one of the reasons I believe it, Carlos, is because, and I've shared this with you before in the past, but I'm very overt about the fact that I believe in the Creator, I believe in God, and that in order for me to be an effective coach, that I have to talk about our capacity as micro creators under the macro creation and macro creator God himself. Mm-hmm. And I don't know another way to go about it. And I mean, you and I are in many ways aligned, and one of the reasons I want to have this conversation with you this morning. But man, I love that. I love that description that you have for how coaching fits into your purpose. How coaching fits into your purpose. All right, so I just want to dive right in, Carlos, because there's a lot to share this morning, and we're ontological coaches. And by the way, in many ways, I'm setting the table, and there's a part of me that's like, maybe we should just get right into it. And so let me say this real quick. We're ontological coaches, and ontology and spirituality are very different. And I'll say this to kind of kick us off, but ontology is the science of being, and it's a science. Spirituality is so much more than that. And one of the things that you and I discussed is that ontology itself provides awareness without a source. There's no source of awareness. There's just awareness, and that there has to be a source when there's awareness, and that source either comes from God or it comes from the world. So and we're going to get back to that, Carlos, because I want to sit there, but I definitely want to just put that out there to set the stage for this conversation. For those who listened last week we talked about the zone of genius. One of the things Matt Sapella talked about is your unique ability. And today we're going to be talking about purpose, which sources that zone of genius. And so, Carlos, when I bring up ontology versus spirituality as we get into this conversation about purpose, I'm curious, what else comes to mind for you? And well, let's just start there. What else comes up for you with ontology versus spirituality?
Well, I think you make a really good point about when we do spiritual work and we bring that awareness up. When we do that from a spiritual context, what we bring that awareness back to, so to speak, is God. The other awareness, other types of getting, the other foundations of awareness are the world, like you said. But then ontology actually is built on, you said it, there is no basis or source. And actually some people, not us in particular, but some groups actually teach that nothingness itself is the foundation. And so, yeah, that's what comes up for me, is that ontology is very good at becoming aware of things that we're normally not aware of. And this ties into the whole conversation that we had a few weeks ago about stories. We were talking about dismantling stories.
That's right, yeah.
So we dismantle them back to what? When we get rid of the stories, we come back to something. And we come back to some original point. And that original point is resting right on top of the foundation that is either for us God, or, like to your point, the world, or there are some people that literally believe that foundation is nothingness itself. So that's what comes to mind, because I've been in what I would consider amazing coaching conversations, or witnessed them, where somebody has this really cool awareness, and then they break through something, and then when it's all done, there's like this little golf clap. Yay. Yeah. And that's always left me empty. And I'm like, what is missing here? Why did we go through, why did this person go through months and months and months of conversation to get to a golf clap? That's it. And it's usually because that foundation is nothing. There's no God in it.
Yeah.
And that's always left me empty.
Well, I mean, and intellectual awareness will leave you empty. Just the knowing of something is not what we're here for. It's the service. It's service is what we're here for. And I believe, I'll just say that, I believe that's why it leaves us feeling empty, ultimately.
Yeah.
At least my personal opinion. So, real quick, I want to define purpose, and I want to define spirituality as we dive into this conversation. And for those of you who've been to one of my Discover and Live Your Purpose workshops, you've heard this before, but the definition of purpose, as I see it, it has 5 different definitions in the Merriam-Webster dictionary, but there are 2 that really jump out for me are the aim or intention of something. And so as we go into this conversation, I want you to be thinking about your aim or your intention, but even bigger than that, God's aim or intention for your life, right? And again, I think Carlos and I have already prefaced that, we believe in God, we believe in the Creator. And so no way we can have this conversation, especially about spirituality, without bringing that in. All right. But then the second piece is the definition of spirituality. And again, this is out of the dictionary. But the definition of spirituality is the quality of being concerned with the human spirit or soul as opposed to material or physical things. This is the definition, you all. As opposed to material or physical things. That is the definition of spirituality. Now, Carlos, I guess the place I'd like to go is let's go ahead and tackle this conversation about spirituality versus religion right on top, because I think that's something that comes up a lot. And so I'm curious, how do you see religion in contrast to spirituality?
Yeah, I would say religion is like my trying to control God or God's opinion through ritual, or even trying to control myself through ritual. It's non-life-giving ritual. Whereas spirituality is the spirit means the breath of God. Because God, God breathes, it says God breathed life into Adam.
Yeah.
And the word there is spirit.
Yeah.
And so it means breath or wind. And so it's the life of God himself in me versus me trying to control something, some aspect of myself or God or others through some religious ritual. And I realize I used the word religious in my definition, but it's ritual.
It's all right, yeah.
But it's not life-giving.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people probably don't know this, but when you look up the etymology of the word, I had this conversation back when I did the series on lessons to teach my son, and one of the lessons would be about religion itself. Beware of religion is the lesson. And the etymology of religion is religare or religere, right? And both of those are Latin words meaning respectively go through again or to bind fast, right? So to go through something again, so when you talk about ritual, that is part of the etymology of the word, to go through something again repeatedly and to bind fast to that thing that you do over and over again. And so I think a lot of times we get religion, like our rituals for, in maybe some way, creating some level of spiritual connection, confused with the spiritual connection itself. And so I wanted to make sure we started there. And by the way, I already know I saw some angry faces on Facebook already where people are like, what? Hey. And again, this is my belief, or Carlos's belief. And again, stick with this as we go, because I believe that there'll likely be some things, not likely, I'm sure, if you listen to me week in, week out, there are going to be some things that really open up your mind and help you in terms of your own pursuit of purpose and spirituality. So, Carlos, with that, let's start with the framework of being human. Because I think when we're talking about fundamentals of purpose and spirituality, we have to start with spirituality first, because I think purpose is more direct. And spirituality can be more obtuse in many ways. And so let's start with the framework of being human. And this is something that you and I have worked through in the past and has helped me tremendously as I think about my own spirituality and who I be as a human being. So how would you break down the framework of being a human being, or in particular, being human? How would you break that down?
Yeah, I would say, not to oversimplify things, but we have three parts to us: a spirit, a soul, and a body. And they all serve different functions. And the spirit is where we commune and know God. Our soul is where we process our lives, and our body is where we interact in the world. There's a very simple framework that I would use.
And I want to bring a little more, if I may, I want to bring a little more clarity to this for someone who's listening. Because when I hear you say, the spirit is how I commune with God, then, and one of the things we talked about is source, right, in terms of awareness and ontology. If my spirit is how I commune with God, then in many ways, God becomes my source. Is that kind of what you're saying now? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but...
Totally. Well,
okay.
And yeah, I mean, the soul is caught in the middle between a spiritual way of being and a in the world way of being. One of those two things is going to be my source, to your point earlier.
Yeah.
Like when we walk back awareness, I find that either my source is the world, everything outside of me, and that's what I process. It comes through my senses, and then my soul processes that. Soul made up of, thinking and feeling and creating. Or I find there's something deeper in me. I have access to a God that loves me and gives me purpose and sets me straight, heals me. That's what I mean by sets me straight, realigns me, and gives me a sense of purpose. And so that's what I mean by that. Got
it. So then let's talk about the soul a bit, because when we look at this framework, and I the more we're talking about it, the more I wish, at least for those watching, we had a visual framework for them to see. But if they're taking notes, then hopefully they'll... Let me say this if you're taking notes. God at source, number one. Your communication and connection with God via the Spirit, right, underneath that, number two. Your upper will. And this is something that is talked about with many intellectuals, even those who are spiritual. But I don't think something that people really understand, Carlos. So I want to spend some time here. Your upper will, and then your soul, your lower will, and then your body that is connected to the world. And so let's kind of talk a little bit more about this, the soul itself, and how it sits between the upper and lower will. Because I just want to start with this framework so we can really understand like how as human beings we're made up. So as we get further into this conversation about purpose, we can really understand spiritually how things operate. And so when I say upper will, like what comes up for you, Carlos?
It's my willingness to surrender to God and say, you're kind of like that prayer I had. Mm-hmm. God, I submit my coaching to you. If you have a different purpose for my coaching, please let me know. That would be an act of surrendering my coaching practice to you. And then God either does or doesn't say something back. And that's all a function of the upper will. I'm willing to give up something or lay something down and have God be my source, not be self-sourced.
Got it. So upper will is, and by the way, let me say this about the upper will. So that way, because somebody on Facebook is saying, where y'all get this from? And this is not just a Linal and Carlos conversation. I want to be clear about this. As a matter of fact, I just started reading Human Nature by Robert Greene. If you're not familiar with Robert Greene is the author of the 48 Laws of Power, The Art of Seduction, Mastery. So he's a very well-known author, respected across many fields of learning. And Robert Greene himself says that as human beings, we have an upper will and a lower will. He did not bring spirituality into the conversation. He was talking about human nature itself. Okay? And what Robert Greene said in this is that the lower will is tied to our humanity and to who we are as human beings. And this is what sources our irrationalities, our human urges, and the things that pull us towards the world. Now let me kind of put this in perspective, right? The lower will is the thing that has us go out and spend money we don't have on a credit card for something that we perceive that we want. That's the lower will. It's the connection to the world, the connection to advertisement, the connection to, and by the way, when we talk about this, when I've talked about this in the past, I'm not connecting you all to it spiritually. What I've been doing is connecting you all to it intellectually, so that way when a conversation like this came along, you could follow. But the lower will is that thing that often moves us in ways that spiritually we find we regret. Or when I'm creating a goal, right? Let's look at a goal. A goal in many ways, if I'm looking outward, is a creation. With it being a creation of some sort, let's say that, if it is sourced by God, then I have to tap into my upper will to achieve this thing. This is one of the reasons I believe, Carlos, that goal achievement for so many people is difficult. Because they have to get outside of the lower will or in some ways into the higher will, like that spiritual connection with God, to actually create. And so that I really wanted to bring an example to that to help people understand. Is there anything else you would share around that, Carlos, to bring more color to it?
Yeah, maybe this is, and I don't mean any disrespect to people that have been deeply, deeply impacted by loss during this COVID thing, but something that I noticed when I was doing some completion work over this year, like how did this year go? Mm-hmm. At the end of the completion work, even though COVID was a huge deal and my business was impacted by it, people I know have been impacted by it, in the end, COVID did not direct it. It's not the defining point of my year. And that's because I had somewhere else to go other than the world to be sourced throughout the year. When money went, when friends were getting sick, when I'm hearing about people in the hospital that I know or people that I know, and even with the political stuff going on, there's so much happening in the world. And if I don't have a source outside of the world, this last year would have been a gigantic stressor. But I had somewhere else within myself to go to find purpose, to find calm, to find peace, to find my value, to find those things. And if all I had was the world, if those are the two choices, is something deeper within myself or everything outside of myself, this is 1 year where I'm glad I had something inside myself.
Man, amen to that. And I'll tell you, man, I 100% agree. Because when we look at the world around us, it's in disarray. I mean, to take, and the type of questions that if I don't have a source in terms of determining how I make my life decisions. And again, we're going to get to purpose in a moment, but I really want to sit with the spirituality piece, because to me, it sources purpose overall. If I don't have a means to make decisions, right, that is coming from what I believe a place outside of me, to take the vaccine or not to take the vaccine. One group of people, one argument saying absolute must, another saying, hey, you shouldn't. How do I make the decision? Where do I look? And this becomes something more than about upper and lower will, but about life itself, and about how I deliver on my purpose. And so I think the last question I'll ask you, Carlos, before we begin to really tap into this conversation around purpose, is when we think about this framework, upper, and the God as source, the spirit that communes with God, and the upper will, the soul, the lower will, and the body. And one of the things we talked about is, awareness from ontology. The question that Carlos and I are really asking is, what governs you? And this is not a popular question, but what governs you? Is it the source you're receiving through spirit from God, or the connection you have to the world? Like, what is running your life? And we have to start there before we get into a purpose conversation, because my belief, and I know, Carlos, yours too, and I want to hear more about it, is that purpose is delivered through God. Like, it's God's purpose for your life. And if it's God's purpose for your life, one of the only ways to live out your purpose is for him to be in charge, for him to be what governs you. And so, what would you add to that?
That governance is the governance of an absolutely loving God that does the work alongside us. It's not a, it's not a dictator. It's a loving Father. Mm-hmm. And that changes the entire thing. So, here's an example. I was listening to this pastor talk about very much this thing, how are we going to be governed? If God gives us a purpose, how do we walk that out? And basically, he used Abraham as the example. And he said, God comes to Abraham and says, I want you to go to a land where you've never been, and you're going to go a way that you don't know, to a people that you've never met, and speak a language you've never learned. And he's literally walking him off. His purpose for Abraham was to walk off of Abraham's map. He had no context or information. There's no Google. There's no way for him to know. So the pastor asked this really great question. If God asks you to walk off your map, how do you do that? How do you walk in obedience to God's call if I have no map for it? And the answer that he gave is just spot on, in my opinion, because it answers a lot of, I'll just say it, is because you walk relationally. Mm-hmm. And the only way to do that, either God's going to guide me, he's going to hold me by the hand and guide me, or he's not. And if God intends for me to fulfill that, that's the only way there is to go. And I love that. Yeah. Because inside of that is a sense of God's rulership, but there's also a sense of love in that. And so, for me, spirituality can't be divorced from love. I believe God is love. Yeah. So that's what I would add to that.
Man, I love that, and I love the story you just told in terms of how the pastor related Abraham's walk to relationship with God, because one of the things that we're going to be talking about next, I think this is a perfect segue, Carlos, is the three kinds of people in relationship with purpose. And the first kind is a person who doesn't know their purpose, right? They're not connected to their purpose on the planet. They're not connected to God's will for their life or God's purpose in their life. And I believe that's one of the reasons why many of us have this emptiness when it comes to life itself, like a feeling of emptiness. You talked about that little clap for an intellectual awareness is like, but there's an emptiness if I'm not connected to God's purpose for my life. The second person is a person who knows their purpose and is not aligned. And I love the example you just gave, because the story of Abraham in the Bible, I think, is a phenomenal correlation to how many of us take on purpose and how many of us don't. Because when you think about this, would you have blamed Abraham for staying put?
Right, he had every reason.
Yeah.
He had every reason not to go.
He had every reason not to go. There's a voice, there's a spiritual unction inside of you that is giving you instructions. And I'm sure when Abraham said, "Hey, I've been instructed by God to leave," people were like, "And go where?" "Well, I don't know." So you about to leave and you don't know where you're going and you're saying this is God's purpose for your life? That's ludicrous. That's crazy. And that's what you'll hear from people. And what it does for me, Carlos, in many ways, man, when we come back from break, I'm going to talk about this. But I relate to this in terms of when I left corporate America. But we do have to take a break. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk about the three kinds of people, finish this conversation about the three kinds of people in relationship with purpose, and begin to talk about, in particular, the fundamentals of living your life's purpose. My name is Linal Harris. You've been listening to Inspirational Perspective right here on WVON 1690 AM, the talk of Chicago. We'll be right back.
The talk of Chicago and the voice of the nation. 1690 WVON, Berwyn, Chicago.
All right. Okay, so, man, what questions do you guys have? This is
the life of her husband, retired Chicago.
This is this is not what you call a, super sexy topic. It's necessary, though. To me, it's the most important topic that we cover in a series of fundamentals. And I love what Carlos just went. I hate that break came up right there, because I really wanted to synthesize that a bit more. Is one of the things I firmly believe, I'm going to say this on the air, is why many of us are not fully aligned with our purpose is because living your life's purpose in many ways is an Abraham walk. It's taking a step of faith in a direction that you have no idea where you're going. You have no idea what's going to happen. And I think one of the other things we have to realize, and I'll talk about this in the purpose course, is that we believe we know what's going to happen where we are, right? So in the job or whatever it is that we're doing, we believe that we know. We have, in many ways, a sense of certainty that is based in intellect, pattern, or in how the world runs. And as you can see, 2020, man, there's nothing certain. So purpose really is abandoning what I believe and what seems to make sense, and saying I'm willing to take a faith walk. And I believe that's the hard part. We're going to talk about why taking that leap of faith is so difficult when we come back. Got a question here. Are you with rituals, pagan rituals like Christmas? Here's the thing,
for me, it's about understanding what's underneath it. And you can look at rituals as right and wrong, but to judge a ritual is really not mine. It's not my role. My role really is just to do my best to stay connected. And I believe that one of the problems that happens when you get into conversations around spirituality, when you get into conversations around purpose, is that a lot of times people want to bring in the do's and don'ts. Hey, look, we all are living a different life, and how we're being sourced according to our spirit and what we're being told is different. And so some of us have liberties around rituals, and some of us don't. Some of us don't even understand that it's a ritual, and some of us do. And so to me, it's not about determining a person's spirituality or a person's walk by what they do and don't do, or for me to judge it as right or wrong. I can't do that. And I don't think any of us can. And so that's my answer to that. Like, do I think that we should be careful and really thoughtful and prayerful about the things that we observe and why we observe them? Absolutely. Absolutely. Are many of us being led astray and off course by the rituals that we undergo in our lives? Absolutely. I believe that. In many ways, like I'll give you an example, it's laughable to think of Easter and a bunny rabbit. And so that's where we have to be wise and begin to understand that in many ways rituals are here to, or some rituals are here to distract us. And so, that would be my answer, man. I'm not into what's right or wrong because everybody's in a different place in their walk. So that's not my job. My job is to provide as the enlightenment. And my purpose is to provide the enlightenment I believe God wants me to provide to people so then they can make the decisions for themselves. And they can be aligned with those decisions in a way that they believe the Creator would have them be aligned. Making a wish over candles is a ritual. Man, most of what we do as human beings is ritual. Human beings, we're storytellers, and storytelling is really a rite. A rite is the etymology of ritual. It's all ritual, bro. I mean, so yeah, I'm not gonna get into the right and wrongs, man. That's to me, it would disrupt the conversation that we're in. And what I'm more interested in is the fundamentals of purpose and spirituality. Okay. Let's see, what other questions? How do you get aligned with your purpose? What are some tools, prayer, meditation, quiet? So we're going to get to that, Pat. But more than anything, give me 1 second because this seems to... All right. I just want to... The speakers over there. How do you get fully aligned with your purpose? In my belief, full alignment with purpose requires spiritual connection. It's one of the reasons why if you come to my workshop, we get into spirituality almost immediately. We're going to be talking about it here in a moment in the second hour. But you can't have a purpose conversation without having a spiritual conversation, because we are on a spiritual journey. And I believe that one of the reasons why being fully aligned with our purpose is difficult is because at some point in that walk, our source, whatever that is, right? Hopefully the Creator gives us an Abraham command. Leave. It happened for me in corporate America, 2015. It's time to go. What? Guys, I was making phenomenal money. Like everything was set. I just got married. Like everything was set. It's time to go. Your purpose is not here. What? The only way I was able to make that leap is I had to strengthen myself spiritually. That came through prayer. It came through meditation. It came through quiet time. It came through just being still. And but mostly through prayer. Like, give me something to hold on to. If this is what I'm supposed to do, give me something to hold on to. Help me out here. And I remember going to an event for the office of the mayor here in Chicago, and a good friend of mine, Deborah Farmer, was there. I sat next to her, and she showed me a scripture verse. And the long and short of it was, God is your source. And that's what I needed spiritually to take the leap. God is ultimately my source. If that's true, then if I take this leap, I'm going to land. And so it comes down to faith. It comes down to faith, in my opinion, and your spiritual connection, ultimately. What other questions do you all have? I like that. Be still and know. Okay.
The talk of Chicago.
If you wanna be about it, come on, let's talk about it. Change up the things you see. Open your mind to possibility. Find your power, passion, and your purpose. You know it's time for you to walk with greatness. Let's murder mediocrity. Free your goals, live out your dream. Purpose right now. Inspirational perspective. Open your mind to a better life. It's time to live. Let's find your purpose now. Inspirational perspective. Let's slay your goals, let your greatness flow. With inspirational perspective.
All right, we're back. You're listening to Inspirational Perspective. I'm your host, Linal Harris, your very own life coach, right here on WVON 1690 AM, the talk of Chicago. Today's topic, the fundamentals of living with purpose and spirituality. Special guest today is Carlos Jones, founder and operator of North Star Leadership Coaching. Welcome back, Carlos. How are you?
Thank you. I'm great. Thanks.
Excellent. So before we went to break, I was breaking down these three different kinds of people in relationship with purpose. And I talked about, number one, the person who has no purpose, or has not, they have a purpose, they just don't know their purpose. Better to say that. Because each of us, everybody that's breathing has purpose. Number two, the person that knows their purpose and is not aligned with that purpose. And number three, the person that knows their purpose and is aligned with that purpose, is aligned with God's purpose for their life. I want to talk a little bit about the person number two, because when you gave the example of Abraham leaving, where we ended was how I'm sure he got ridiculed, questioned by friends and family about leaving. And why many of us don't live our purpose is because even after we distinguish it, it doesn't seem to make sense to other people. Maybe not even make sense to us. And I'm just curious, what's your take on someone who knows their purpose, and maybe you can even give a personal example of where you've been. Someone who knows their purpose, but is not aligned with their purpose. What do you think is a symptom? Like, what is the symptom of that? Like, what causes that?
Cause of that can be a lot of different things, for sure. For me, it's lack of connection, which is community, and it would be lack of my own development. That would be the two reasons why I have a sense of where I'm supposed to go, but I'm either trying to do it on my own, or I just I don't have the maturity for it. And both of those, to me, are answered in seeking God and developing my community, back to community. Any success I've had or maturity I've had in my life is a result of amazing people being around me. That it's a function of, like we talked about a few weeks ago, the way God blesses the world is through other people. And so the other thing, I got to watch that, because I have to be careful about the people I select, in the sense of, am I picking people that are going to help me get off the hook, or am I picking people that I know are going to help me follow through on what I know? And so I know that, but I've had extraordinary. The person that comes to my mind is an amazing woman named Ruth Hamp. We all call her Mama Hamp, and she has such an extraordinary impact on my life. But she just deeply, deeply, deeply lived in communion with God, and opened up her home on Friday nights for people to come over, and she would just be there for people. People would ask questions. She would teach. She would pray for people, counsel, give wisdom, and it was a life-giving experience. And she did that she was an older lady, not extremely old, but just older, like she was in her 70s, I believe, and just had a deep fellowship with God. And the fruit of that, what really helped people come back to life that had been struggling spiritually. So for me, I was seeking that. I knew, and you used the word life. I like that. That's probably my favorite definition of spirit, is life, God's life.
Yeah.
And I can sense it, when you sense it in somebody else. I became an avid seeker of wherever I could find it, either God directly or seeking people that I could just tell. I'm like, that is somebody who has maturity, has fruit in their life, and I want to get around them and ask my questions. As a matter of fact, at my church, I found this out a couple of years after the fact, but I was known in the board meetings as the question dude. And they're like, did Carlos take anybody to lunch this week? And a couple of pastors would raise their hand. Yep, he called me and we had lunch. Yep, he called me, we had lunch. And that was it. I was seeking and seeking and seeking, however I could find.
So
that's what I would say, is if somebody has a hunger for it, go for it.
And the other thing I heard you say, which I love, because I hadn't thought through this the way you just shared it, is that when a person knows their purpose but they're not aligned, and by the way, we know when we're not aligned, like we can feel it spiritually, that one of the places they could go is community, and being really thoughtful about the people they surround themselves with to strengthen themselves. And I love it, because I'm more direct, Carlos. I'm like, well, that person lacks faith. and by the way, how I strengthened myself, right, in terms of taking the purpose leap in my own life has been community. So thanks for distinguishing that and bringing that to the surface, because community has a lot to the people around us, and we talk about that all the time when it comes to goal setting and things like that. But even in our purpose walk, the people around us and the people that we listen to and the people that are in our space have a tremendous impact on how we align with God's purpose for our life. Thanks for that.
Absolutely.
And then this notion of faith. And I just want to come back to faith, because I said this many times on the show, that I often believe that faith is misunderstood. And that faith is belief plus action. It is not just belief, but it is belief plus action. And that when we believe and we act, that is an act of faith. But typically when it comes to purpose, we have to continue to act. And how do we continue to act? We have to fuel our faith. How do we fuel our faith? With the things that we listen to, the things that we read, the things that
we surround ourselves with, and one of the things you called out there was community in particular. So community, and so faith is a huge piece of that, but community too. Thanks so much for that distinction. So in your opinion, then what distracts us from living our life's purpose? Like, what gets in the way? So here I am living my life's purpose. What can distract me? Or here I am in the conversation around taking the leap to live my life's purpose. What can keep me or distract me from doing that?
Oh, anything. And anything that seems more appealing at the moment, anything that seems a little bit easier in the moment, anything that gets me even wrong thinking about the whole thing can distract me from it. And this is why community, I think, is really important. I have a mentor friend that he said something so important. He said, even though he is a mentor of mine, he plays the role of mentor in a lot of people's lives, he tells every single one of the people he mentors, don't use me as your only mentor. He said maturity comes in the fullness of the body of people, because no one person is going to have all of it. It's actually found in the totality of conversations and lives and connections and relationships. And there might be a few that are stronger than others, but it's in the totality, it's in the balance of different people's walks and sharing their journeys and sharing their stories that we find truth, or we find something that we can grab onto. But as far as distractions are, easy ones are like need. Like in my pain, I go somewhere to relieve my pain and forget to go inward. And that's a super easy one to be distracted by. And it's even, I don't even know if I'd call that a distraction, it's just hard.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just hard. Or it can be on either end of that spectrum. It can be extreme failure, extreme success in life. Not just, I don't mean financially, but like things going super well, or things going terribly wrong. Either one of those ends can get me off of that journey pretty easily.
Got that. And so, for someone who maybe is listening to this conversation and they're asking themselves right now, okay, so what are my distractions? One of the things I typically say is, the distractions any distraction to you living your life's purpose is a weed in your garden, is one of the things I put. And I also believe many of us, we use distractions to cover our fear. And what I mean by cover our fear is I'm afraid to take the leap. I'm clear on what my purpose is. And fundamentally, I know the direction I'm supposed to go. But I'm afraid. And I think we as men, we're really good at this, right? Because we don't know how to be with fear. It's funny, I just started working with a new client who's a man. And fear came up in the first conversation. He's like, I'm not afraid. And I was like, okay, we'll get there. But fear, I believe, is the purpose poison in many ways, and how we handle fear is going to have a lot to do with our ability to live God's purpose for our lives. So what if I'm a person, Carlos, where I have a desire to live out my purpose, but I also have a desire to be successful in this world, to continue on the path. Like I'm successful right now, and financially things are going well. Work is going well. My health is in good order. My relationship seems to be going well. Everything seems to be right. Because I think, it's easy to have a conversation with somebody where, things are off or things aren't going well, to have a compelling conversation about purpose with a person like that. But for many of us, things are going well. How do I begin to gain a desire for living, like, because there's a piece of us that always will desire this. How do I strengthen my desire to live God's purpose for my life when everything around me is going so good? Like, how would you answer that question?
Yeah, I would say, on a kind of a principled level, I would say it's coming back to that communion. Mm-hmm. My highest desire in life is either wanting to be close to and connected to God, or it's something else. And if it's something else, that something else is eventually going to take over. If it's wanting to be closer to God, everything will begin to will shift that way. And so part of it is just checking, what is my deepest desire? Mm. And because it's totally easy, do I try to use God to get riches, or is being close to God and God giving me wisdom and God giving me purpose and God healing my woundedness actually just create a human being that's more able to be wealthy? Like, I think it's almost like a side effect of letting God take over my life is I become a better citizen, I become a better worker, I become a better husband and mm-hmm. father, mm-hmm. and as a result of being better in those areas, I'm more fruitful and I gain more. So, but that's never the goal. I don't use God in order to get those things. Yeah. I seek God, and in the seeking of God and Him blessing me, I end up with those things sometimes, and that's not always the case. Yeah. And the other thing is to give those things in my life a purpose. So money can be given a purpose. The function of, like, I have a Christian coach who one of his outright goals is to make $100 million. And it actually was really shocking because he's one of the most spiritually minded people I've ever been around and absolutely loves God. God has done so much in this man's life in terms of healing, came from horrific upbringing. Mm-hmm. Anyway, and so I just flat out asked him, I said, it seems so contrary that somebody so spiritually minded and loves God has this 9-figure goal. I don't get it. It seems weird. And I'm not trying to judge you, but it just comes off as greedy. And I said it. I just said, and I'm asking this from ignorance. I'm not trying to be judgmental. And he said, oh, that's because every bit of my money has a purpose. Mm. The purpose is to expand the gospel. The purpose is to bless people. The purpose is to house the homeless. The purpose is to create jobs. The purpose is to do that. And so, because I'm not waiting until all that money comes in to get busy and help people. I help people already, but I have a big purpose for it. I want to change the world. And all of a sudden it just recontextualized mm-hmm. blessing and heart.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that a bit more towards the end of the show, like the different levels of purpose. One of them being the level where you begin blessing others, because there's, a lot of times we say there's levels to this. Well, there are levels to this, and one of the levels is, the final level is the opportunity to bless others through God's purpose for your life. I want to right here, Carlos, share an analogy for us from someone who's really grappling with this conversation on spirituality. Okay. And often, when we relate to ourselves, and I think even in 2020, this is a really important conversation. Because when we relate to ourselves as human beings in the context of the world we live in today, especially in 2020, we relate to ourselves as bodies with a spirit. And I think that's one of the reasons why we find the world in this turmoil, especially around racial sensitivities, racial conflict, discrimination. I mean, the list goes on to the things that we are conflicted with in the world today. And again, going back to my opening comments, I believe it's because we're so focused on the physical and not really understanding the multidimensional nature of the lives that we live, of the experience that we're all having. and that the most important part of that experience is spiritual. And so I would challenge the audience as they listen to the rest of the show that instead of relating to yourself or relating to ourselves as bodies with a spirit, that we begin thinking of ourselves as spirits with the body. How do we source the spirit? Because if I'm a spirit with a body, that means that my journey really is spiritual, right? I'm on a spiritual journey. And the physical is just, the outward manifestation of the spiritual journey that I'm on. So then the question becomes, like, how do I source the spirit and grow my faith to live aligned with God's purpose? Like, how does a person source the spirit and grow their faith? But I want to add a little bit more to the analogy, just to strengthen it before you answer that question. Another way of thinking about this is that many of us, we put so much focus on the vehicle, right? So another analogy I give around spirituality is right now my car is sitting outside. That car has no power. Now, I think it's a fairly powerful and unique and beautiful vehicle. And it has a lot of capabilities, very much like the human body. But without me inside of it as the driver, it can go nowhere. It can go nowhere. No different than we as human beings. We have been blessed with these bodies that have the capacity to harness our spirit or to take our spirit on this journey. But all of the focus seems to be on the body. Oh my goodness. It looks like Carlos is Hispanic. Linal is black, right? We put these labels, and the audience already knows how I feel about those labels, right? But we put these labels on ourselves to distinguish ourselves from one another when every last one of us, regardless of skin color, is on a spiritual journey. And regardless of what a brother looks like, I can be in spiritual communion with him, right? This is one of the things that Malcolm X figured out late in his journey and began to share. So, setting that premise, how do we source the spirit and grow our faith in a world that is so physically focused?
I think you just said it right there, is where's my focus? Am I a spirit bringing my identity as one of God's children to my light? Or am I a world person who finds his identity in the chaos of what the world is right now, or tries to find it and ends up having to defend something? So, and I'll give you an example from the same church where I was the question dude. Two very good friends of mine, one white, one African American, and both in the same church, and something happened. I don't remember. I don't even know. I've heard just the story of it, but something happened in which the white gentleman said something very derogatory about the African American guy. Here we are. We're all worshiping. We all love Jesus. We're all in church doing our thing, and something happens. Kevin ends up saying something very nasty about Keith, and it's bad. It's bad. Those two end up in a very bitter, as you can imagine, place with each other. The pastor asks them both to go and consider, who are you? Are you children of God? They're going to work this thing out? Or are you white and you're African American and you're never going to work this out? Which one are you? And it's not like they have to choose, I'm this or that, but which one is primary? Am I the outside expression of how God made me, or am I spiritual? Am I a child of God? Long story short, those two ended up in several conversations. There's a lot of repenting going on, a lot of hurt on both sides from lots of descendants. This goes back to parents and grandparents and a lot of different things. Long story short, Kevin ends up being Keith's best man in his wedding.
Wow.
And those two to this day are best friends. And the ability to work that out, I don't know another context where that works.
Yeah.
But they had to give up something, not give it up, that's the wrong word. They had to prioritize something above something else to get through that conversation. And the something else was, I know at a conviction level that we have the same Father.
Yeah.
I know we have the same Father, and I know something in me wants to be connected to you. And I know that I'm really hurt. And I know that I don't understand. And I know I'm bitter. And I know there's parts of me that don't want anything to do with you. And I have to do an inward journey to even be able to get to the conversation.
Yeah.
And those two men displayed such courage to be able to do that. And they ended up talking about that in front of the whole church.
Wow.
And to have it go from such, because it started with an under-the-breath, nasty comment and ended up being a public display of reconciliation that was so powerful.
Wow.
And so, that's how I'd answer your question of, what do we do with this?
Yeah. I think that's a phenomenal answer. So then that brings up another question that I believe that every last one of us, everyone that can hear my voice, everyone that can hear your voice, has asked themselves. And that is, who am I? Who am I? And Carlos, I'll pose that question to you. Who are you? Like, who is Carlos Jones? And, for those watching on Facebook, they can see your picture, they can see your complexion, they can see maybe your ethnicity. But who is Carlos really? Like, who are you?
Yeah, I define myself, I have to, for my own. I am Carlos, loved by Abba Father. That is my primary. I am the object of God's affection, and I believe every human being is. And when I start with it as the premise, when that is literally who I am, that is the deepest part of who I am, made in the image of God, absolutely loved by God and called by His purposes, and I allow that to flow through everything else. It empowers everything else, and it corrects and realigns everything else. And that's a long process, but that's how I would define myself.
I love that, man. I love that. I mean, I imagine that in some of your toughest times, that definition has sourced you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And some people know my story. I'm, lost my parents at 2.5 and and then adoptive parents. It was a mixed bag for sure. A lot of good, but also a lot of abuse in that. And there's a lot of confusion around identity. And I'm still seeking and walking and looking for even clearer definitions of who am I, what is my purpose. Like, that's not just a one and done. It's not a statement on a piece of paper. It's got to be a lived experience of myself, for sure, and that's awakening more and more and more. And again, I think we find ourselves in, or at least I do, I find myself coming into focus, better and better focus with community. It's amazing people that have walked their own journey. And when I get around them, they help me see myself.
Love that. Love that. So, you know who you are. Then the next question I would ask is, then why are you alive? Like, why is Carlos here with us 2020? Why are you alive in this age and time?
Yeah, I believe I'm here because my job is to be still, to commune with God, and to inspire and support others to do the same. And in that, and I'll give you, this is something I learned from some Jewish Christians, is, the idea of the tree of life. And if you can imagine, like, a root system of a tree, of a healthy tree, is huge. It's not like it goes 2 inches under the ground, and there's just a little bit of it. It's a gigantic root system.
Yeah,
It's this big, robust root system, grows a nice big tree. And in the Jewish Christian understanding of the tree of life, they picture it as upside down. So the root system is actually up in heaven, and that is where we get identity, value, love, purpose, and then those nutrients from our spirit, which is communes with God, flows down the trunk of the tree, which would be our soul, where we're processing, and then out into the branches, and a healthy tree becomes very fruitful, and that fruit is hanging in the world. And our lives become these fruitful expressions of God himself working his way through our own lives. And I just love that picture. So I don't know every in and out of why I'm here, but I'm learning more of it, and I'm learning the best thing for me to focus on is to make sure that root system is in heaven and not the other way around. Not the right side up tree, so to speak. So that's my job, is fruitfulness, maturity, and that maturity and fruitfulness comes by seeking God himself.
And would you say that leans then into what your purpose is in life? Like, how would you take what you just shared, which was phenomenal, and then, excuse me, correlate that into what you believe is God's purpose for your life?
I believe that is my purpose.
Yeah,
my purpose is to, because I believe God's told me expressly that very thing, is my job is to be fruitful and mature in him.
Is that permanent?
And that the function of that is not... Now, like we talked about before, just to bring a couple of things together, that maturity and fruitfulness is actually going to bring me wealth at some level. It's going to help my relationships succeed. And that's part of it, is it will be a blessing, but that blessing, again, is given a purpose. It's to give away. It's to be a blessing. And then the other part of it is the maturity itself is there for people that are hurting and struggling and lost. Because I have my journey, my story. My story is my testimony. And I've heard this great distinction from Graham Cook, who's a pastor I love listening to, but Graham Cook says there's a difference between testimony and history. My history is what I did. My testimony is what God did. And I love that. And so my history becomes a testimony as God intervened in my own destruction and helped me come out of that and begin to breathe life into me. And so telling his story helps people. Telling what God did to me helps people. So I went from, because, another part of losing my parents was I actually don't know where I was born. I know a country. I was born in Colombia. But I don't know my parents, don't have any conscious memory of them. I don't know my birth date because they don't have that record. So there's this real sense of not being identified.
Wow.
No concrete definition. And somehow it's perfect. In the sense of, while that's tragic, it's perfect. Because my identity isn't defined, my deepest identity isn't defined by those things anyway. And I've had to, what it's caused in me is a hunger and a longing. You can imagine the years that went into longing to have some sense of who in the heck am I?
Yeah, man.
And a lot of that's driven by disconnection that got, the connection that got severed way, way, way back in the day, and it put in me that longing. And I would say, that longing, people have different longing for something. And when that can get converted into a longing for God, who is the source of all of it, I think that's a very good use of that longing.
Carlos, man, I love that, because one of the things that I talk about in the purpose course, and of course you and I, we've been connected for quite some time now, and I'm very familiar with your story, but I think what you shared this morning really connects me differently with your story. And in the context of purpose and spirituality, it feels divine. And the reason I say that is because when I think about, when I think about purpose is
our identity. And you just revealed that, I mean, you, as a human being, someone who really struggled with identity for all the appropriate reasons. I mean, not knowing your parents, not knowing your birthday, not even knowing in particular what city you were born in. And many of us, like, we use those as identifiers. I mean, especially here in Chicago, right? In Chicago, as soon as you say, and the folks listening, they know, as soon as you say, I'm from Chicago, the next thing they ask is, what high school did you go to? Because there's a sense of identity with that, right? And then if it's not what high school did you go to, it's, well, where you from in Chicago? South side, west side? Because all of those things are used as our physical identifiers. And what I hear you saying is that in many ways, as a young man, you didn't have that type of identity. And so where you found identity is in your purpose, in your connection to God, in your communion with God, but also in your spirituality. That's powerful. That's absolutely powerful. Man.
And that gives hope to people.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I don't have these identifiers, then if I can find identity without having those identifiers, anybody can find their identity.
Yes, sir. I believe that, man. I believe that. So I want to go next then to how does, like in your case, you know your purpose and you have a connection to God, right? There's a source of spirituality and a source of spirit that is active in your life. And purpose is dynamic. And what I mean by that is I know my life's purpose. I have a physical statement that relates to my life's purpose that I use to guide me. But the real guidance comes from those quiet times, right? The meditation, the prayer, etc. And one of the things I believe is that God uses the purpose that he's placed in our lives as our compass, as our life's compass. And I also believe that our passions in many ways become our mental and spiritual GPS and direction notification. Like God will place different passions into our lives and as activators of purpose in many ways, or activators of directionally what we should be doing and where we should be going in alignment with his purpose. And of course, as those passions come in, we're asking, and meditating and praying, God, why am I so drawn to this? And he's leading us the entire way. The other thing I believe is that we are given gifts from birth. And these gifts come in the form of talents. And these are the things that we should be utilizing in the execution of our purpose. He gives us the capacity to develop strengths. These are things that are not the endowed gifts that he gives us, but the strengths that we develop over time as we move through this world. And then there are roles that we play. I'm curious, and this is my take in how I teach, living your purpose. But I'm curious, like as you move forward and as your life's purpose, as it being dynamic, continues to evolve, like how do you get direction? And how do you know whether it's time to turn right or to turn left in accordance with your purpose?
That's a great question. I think over time, as I mature, my thoughts and my emotions begin to align more with how God thinks, and so there's an internal check. For some reason, one of my prayers was, this is a while ago, I'm full of bad ideas. I got lots of bad ideas. And one of my prayers years ago was, God, would you please help me ruin my bad ideas sooner than later?
That's a good prayer. And
what started happening was I would get just that, like I'm going to go down a road and I would get an instant check. And prior to that, I was rebellious and did my own thing, and I would override these subtle checks. So these checks would come in and say, you might want to check that. And if I honored the check, I would end up finding some level of wisdom about it. I would check it with a friend. I would check it with, somebody that, back to my other comment, somebody that would keep me on the hook, not get me off the hook. And so when I honored it, that's what that looked like. But I would override that as well. And eventually I had enough bad consequences of my own poor choices of overriding those things. I just pray, God, would you do it faster and more clearly? And so I started getting to the point where the second I had a bad idea, I got the check within that second. I'm like, there's something up with that.
Yeah.
And so I'd go do it. And fundamentally what that speaks to, I think, is a honoring, it's honoring my deepest self. My deepest self being as a child of God.
Yeah.
Is this in line with what God wants for me as his child? And that's what I was asking for that check for. So there are things that, if it's about maturity and fruitfulness, I kind of picture the soul as like an orchard where the purpose is to learn how to plant the seed, water, put nutrients in, and tend to this thing until it grows into a tree and becomes fruitful, and then grow another tree, and then grow another tree, and learn how to grow things in my life. And so my purpose is life. It's fruitfulness itself. And so things that are in line with that are how I make decisions. Things that aren't in line with that, and it's not always obvious, but I know that as a guiding post. I think it's Dave from a couple of weeks ago that, what's his thing about let your vision make your decision.
Yep, let your vision.
That's such a great phrase, and I would say that's a lot of it. I might not know all the particulars at every point, but I can knock out 80%, 90% of my decision making right off of just knowing what my purpose is.
And so I want to bring that to this year, because I know this has been a challenging year. And one of the things that I've said often on the air is that I'm so thankful for purpose, because my purpose has given me peace. Like, I know that I'm living aligned with God's purpose for my life. I'm sure of that. And, it's not perfect. There are elements and opportunities in terms of me aligning fully in the ways that I can align in every aspect and every walk of my life. But I know that ultimately I'm doing my best to stay in the guardrails. And so as a result of that brings a certain level of peace. And as 2020 began to unfold, I saw so much fear. And to be honest, there was moments of fear. But what I'm really thankful for is, because of my walk with God and because of my spiritual knowledge and spiritual connection in alignment with purpose, that fear was resolved fairly quickly, right? With a prayer, with a meditation, like the fear was gone. Like, hey, you're where you're supposed to. Keep doing what you're supposed to do. As a matter of fact, lean in. How has this played out for you in 2020? I'm really curious. Like, how has this played out for you in 2020, and where do you see it taking you in 2021 as we continue, God willing?
Yeah. So one thing that happened to me early on when COVID happened, there was a month where 2/3 of my business disappeared overnight.
I remember that.
And they just got taken out. My clients got taken out. They're losing money. They can't afford coaching. All of a sudden, they're out. And I remember thinking through, like, what in the world am I going to do? What am I going to do? What am I going to do? And that night, after I lost all that business, went to bed, and I dreamt about zombies. This is so bizarre. Dreamt about zombies, and I'm having to fight off these zombies. And I woke up the next morning going, that's weird. I don't even watch zombie shows. And why am I thinking about zombies? And it was kind of an apocalyptic dream. And so I was like, what is that about? And what I got was, I saw myself as, I have to do something. I have to solve this. It's all on me. And if it's all on me, it felt like the end of the world. I can't do this.
Yeah.
And I realized my fear and my terror, which manifested itself in a zombie dream, was self-reliance. I was like, oh, I'm getting the clients. I'm the one getting the money for my family. I'm the source of this thing, without even realizing that was what I was actually doing. And what it woke me up to was, this is an opportunity to lean on God and to give up leaning on myself as the source. And because I didn't realize I'd done it. And I've done that in other areas of my life. I hadn't done that in this one. And so I repented and just said, God, would you forgive me for thinking of money as a function of what I'm doing and who I am to people, and see it as yours. It's yours. You're the one that brings money, not clients.
Yeah.
They do. I'm thankful to clients. Not like I'm not thankful. Thankful to clients, but ultimately God is my provider, not people. And he uses people in a good way. Uses them. He uses all of us for each other. That's what I meant by God uses people to bless people.
Okay.
He uses people for each other, but ultimately he's the one that's bringing things to me that I need. And so once I could do that, I could relax. All of a sudden there was a relaxation in my spirit. And I was like, oh, it's not on me. It's not zombie time. And and all of a sudden that I got something solid in me. There was a confidence in me. I was like, oh, I'm good. I have a peace in me. There's a calm. I know God's going to take care of me and my family. And I don't know how all that's going to look, but I do know one thing for sure. I'm going to stop. I'm absolutely not going to pressure my clients. Like, come on, you need to get through this because secretly I've got this need.
Yep.
I'm not going to do that. As a matter of fact, it went the other way.
Yeah.
I felt led to all the clients that didn't drop me. I cut all their prices in half for 3 months. That was automatic. I went to them and I said, even though you haven't dropped me as a coach right now, I know that you are having some level of impact by this COVID thing. And so I'm automatically I'm not dropping any of my services. You still get 100% services for half price. And if it needs to go lower, I'm willing to coach you for free. And I coached several companies and clients for free for months. And we were fine. And then I got some of that PPP money, and people started to get things back, and things worked out. But there was a moment where I didn't know that's how it was going to turn out. Yeah. But I felt absolute peace to be able to extend generosity at a time when relying on myself led me to panic.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I'll share this, Carlos. I remember, because we were all going through that together and having lots of conversation. And it's interesting where we all landed. I mean, in different ways, we did different things in our businesses. But what I noticed as a theme for those of us who in our community, for those of us who are led by purpose, is that we began to give. We began to give. That's when I started the Monday afternoon webinars. Like, I'm going to do this for free. And I didn't take a 2/3 hit in my business. I took a 26% hit. But nonetheless, it was concerning. It was concerning, and the only thing I knew to do is say, hey, the only reason I'm in this business is because it aligns with my life purpose. I am here to help people. And I recall telling my clients who couldn't work with me to say, hey, that does not mean you can't call. I'm reserving this time, and I am here during this time, and call me if you need the support. And much like you, as things began to turn around, those clients came back, and I'll tell you, I don't know where things are in your business, but 2020 has been one of the best years for me financially in the releasing of control. One of the best years for me financially as an entrepreneur, and again, it just goes to show the awesome power of being fully connected to God. And the beauty that comes with his peace and the blessings that come from living aligned with your purpose.
And even what's usable about all this is even my journey of the zombie. Like, I had the zombie dream, and that woke me up to, oh my gosh, I'm not relying on God at all right now. I'm totally self-consumed with my own self-efforts. Just telling that part of my story to my clients woke them up to, oh, I'm doing the same thing. That's why I'm completely outside my mind panic. And for those who do have faith, it allowed, and so I guess I'm saying all that to say all of it's usable, even my own fallible moments. So, yeah, and and this sits inside of another context, which is, I was doing mission work in South Africa years ago, and I remember I prayed one night I was literally asking God, just, how do you work in my life? I want to know how you work in my life so that I can cooperate with it and with you. And he gave me a dream, and in the dream, he just kept speaking the word balm water. And I don't know why it came up on the Google search the way it did at the time, because when I Google it now, it doesn't come up the same way. But long story short, balm water turns out to be, if you can imagine a vat of chemicals with a fire underneath. And in order to, every different chemicals have different boiling points.
Right.
And so what I got was that the fire gets raised to a certain temperature, it brings the liquid, the mixture, to a certain temperature, and one at a time, different chemicals start to boil. And when they boil, they steam. The steam goes up in the air. It hits an ice-cold metal roofing. And when that steam hits the cold roof, it turns into beads of liquid, and they drain down the edge of this tin roof, and they get caught in buckets. And that's a way to extract a chemical out of a liquid, is to bring it to its boiling point and let it do that process.
Right.
And I said, so I got that, and I said, so how does that work? And he said, listen, your life, who you are, is this vat of different things. There's some sin in there, there's some gifts, there's some really incredible good stuff, there's some that's immature, some that's mature. And at different times in your life, I'm trying to draw different things to the surface. That would be my awareness.
Wow.
And sometimes it's a good thing I want to draw up.
60 seconds. Keep going up, please.
Yeah, so I want to draw good things up to the surface so you can start cooperating and doing those things. And at other times I want to draw something that's not so good up to the surface so you can get rid of it. And what I found, so I said, so what's the fire? And he said, the fire are the circumstances of your life. So COVID is a fire, and it drew to the surface my fear, and that was something to get rid of. And so just considering that part of growth is discerning and asking God, what is this circumstance? What's this pressure? What's this heat meant for? And how do I cooperate with you in that?
Wow. Carlos, man, I love that. How can people find you if they want to reach out, they want to follow you on social media? How can they do that?
Easiest way is to email me, and I'll send you links, transformationpath@gmail.com.
Carlos, thank you so much for sharing with us today, man. I got a lot from this. I know the listening audience got a lot from this. Thank you for your gift of perspective, your gift of wisdom this morning as well, and for living your purpose and the impact that you've had on my life and the impact I know that you will have on the listeners' lives as they process and hear the words that you had to share. Thank you.
Thanks, Linal. You're a great blessing to me.
Likewise. All right, that's our show. I don't have a better way to end. That 2020, the circumstance itself is the fire, and the fire is here to boil something off. For you, what is it boiling off? Well, you've been listening to Inspirational Perspective. I'm your host, Linal Harris, your very own life coach, right here on WVON 1690 AM, the talk of Chicago. Be blessed, live with purpose, and remember, first and foremost, you're on a spiritual journey, a spirit that has been blessed with the body. Have a phenomenal Sunday, everyone. I'll see you back next week.
Was dating. She spent 4 years in prison and was released
all right,
at the
you all.
age of 21.
That's the show, man. Let me tell you, that was. It's a very different type of show, very necessary show. I'm gonna say one of the most important shows I've ever done. And please share the stream. Let people know to go into it with patience and go into it with commitment to get to the end. because I believe there's something in here for all of us. I'll be re-listening to it. Thank you all so much, as always, for your support. And look forward to being back next Sunday. For my Slayer Goals members, I'll be with you all in the next 28 minutes or so for our membership call. And for those of you who join me on Monday, I'll see you tomorrow. Until then, God bless you.